everybody, and welcome to another edition of Shmoozing with Avi. We have an extraordinary guest today, a woman by the name of Nora Armani. She's an award-winning actor and filmmaker with international stage and screen credits, performances, multiple languages. But what's amazing is what she has done in the world of film and social relevance. She's curated, guest-curated, and organized film events and festivals internationally since her debut at the 1992 tribute to Armenian cinema. And that was at the AFI Film Festival in Los Angeles, as well as the Kennedy Center in Washington, D.C. She actually represented the Ministry of Culture of Armenia in the film division from 1991 to 1993, organizing numerous film events and retrospectives on cinema worldwide. She's also organized and participated in festivals in Paris, London, Edinburgh, Birmingham, Inverness, Cardiff, and many more. But what blows me away is she's also a sociologist. And she served as a panelist at Harvard University and the Harriman Institute at Columbia University. She holds a master's degree in theater and a master's degree in sociology. She's taught theater, media studies, performing arts schools, colleges, universities, and state conservatories internationally. Nora Armani is the founding artistic director of SR, the Socially Relevant Film Festival in New York since January of 2013, coming up on a decade. Nora Armani, please join us. And I am so excited to speak to you about your work. Hi.
Hi, thank you so much. This is an amazing introduction. When he's done introducing this amazing person, he'll probably get to me.
Sweet. Well, you are that amazing person that I just introduced.
Thank you. Thank you.
Just before we started recording, you mentioned something about your background. And I always like to start my interviews by finding out a little bit about your personal life. Where were you born? Where did your family come from? How did you get to be who you are today? And then we'll talk about all the amazing work you do.
It's a very, very interesting question, and I'm already getting tears in my eyes, not because my background is something to cry about or over, but it's because whatever we do, anywhere we look, our identity, who we are, where we come from, and what community or group we belong to determines really our journey and what we do with it. As much as some people might not want to own up their belonging or identity or whatever and try to run away from it or whatever, but it's part of you. It's part of who you are. So your question is very pertinent. I am Nora Armani. I was born in Egypt, land of the pharaohs. And it was amazing at the time when I was growing up. The Egypt of then is different from the Egypt of now. Egypt itself has gone through many, many stages, as I have separately. And when I go back to my childhood, I remember an Egypt that was very diverse, very populated with different nationalities, with different people. And then came Nasser's revolution, and a lot of people were driven out of Egypt. And just now we were talking about that. There was a huge Jewish community in Egypt. There were synagogues. In fact, my aunt used to live next to the big synagogue on Cairo, in the center of Cairo. And it was very easy to describe the place because it was the building right stuck to the synagogue. So it was very, very easy. And then when the revolution happened and everyone was exiled, that was a very sad moment in history, in Egyptian history. And we as Armenians, lots of Armenians immigrated to Canada, America, and different other, Australia and all that. But our family stayed put, but my father kept bringing up his Jewish friends. He used to say, I learned so and so much this from so and so. I learned that from so and so. I used to go to these parties and auctions on gatherings and so on. And I heard so much about that I wanted to meet these people. And years later, I came across some people who were Egyptian Jews in exile, and a project came about, which we will talk about at a different time. But it was a fascinating time to grow up in Egypt. My family is an Armenian family. My mother came from Aleppo. She was born in Syria after the Armenian genocide. My grandmother was a survivor, and they ended up in Aleppo. And from there, where she was born, came and settled in Egypt. And my father's side of the family did not go through the genocide because they were already in Egypt way before that. And my grandfather was a jeweler in Old Cairo, in the Khan al-Khalili Bazaar, which whoever knows of it will identify. And he came from Istanbul. That's another place where there was a huge Jewish community alongside the Armenians. And he came to Egypt to establish himself as a jeweler. And as life coincidences happened, the grandfather and grandmother met. The father was born. The mother came from Syria. They met, and Nora was born. So
nice. Nice. What's amazing to me is, as you tell your story about survivors and surviving the genocide of the Armenians, I realize I am a child of survivors myself. My parents happened to be in Europe. My mother was born in Siberia. My father was born in what is now Ukraine. And so, my father was in Auschwitz. I grew up knowing so much about the survival of him and so many other Jews and so many others. But what occurs to me is that no matter what faith you come by, no matter what culture, no matter what history, we end up all sharing the similar backgrounds of human beings under difficult circumstances. And survival is such a big part of our lives. Obviously, it was part of making you so socially relevant. Tell us, if you wouldn't mind, about your memories as a child. You grew up in Egypt till about what age?
I went to actually college in Egypt. I went to the American University in Cairo. So that was basically until my life in Egypt. And then I went to London to continue my sociology studies for my master's degree at the London School of Economics. And that was the cutting point that I left Egypt after my university studies. So it was quite a long life in terms of development, like a person. So it's not like I didn't leave Egypt as a child. I can't say that. But even so, I was quoting Lillian Hammond, the author that I was telling you about before we went on the show. She said, I left Egypt 50 years ago, but Egypt never left me. And I think our birthplaces, as people who have been persecuted or survived or left and went other places, the birthplace has a very strong impact on us in reality.
Sure, and it's genetic as well. I mean, people laugh at me sometimes, but there is a genetic element to all of this as well, because we go back so many years and so many generations, and it's ingrained.
And in the water, in the air you breathe, in the water you drink, it makes you who you are. And of course, all the different layers that come and attach themselves to you after that are also very, very important, because the different countries you live in, you take on. Like I lived over 10 years in France, and it happens to me sometimes when I'm speaking French, people think I'm French, but I go, no, not at all. I'm not French at all. But you take it on, you become that other person. Nonetheless, you always keeping your first initial identity. So it's basically you learn to survive. And what you were saying about the memory as survivors that has passed through generations is very, very powerful. Sometimes there are all these memories of traumas and situations that we haven't lived ourselves. But if it's as though we have, it's you.
I was going to say, I mean, what's interesting to me is every year during Passover, I sit around the table with families, friends, Jews, non-Jews, and we talk about the exodus of the Jews from Egypt. Thousands and thousands of years ago, before, Israel, before the problems, before the wars, before all of that, we were Egyptian. We were part of the Egyptian culture. And then we had an exodus. The Armenians, were part of a culture, in Turkey and Armenia, and then the genocide of the Armenians. And then your family ended up in Egypt, going back and forth and in and out of what is really the birthplace of humankind.
Yeah.
Within you and me both are the genes of, and all of us really are the genes of the origins of civilization. Yeah. Which is quite stunning. So you were an adult when you left Egypt.
Yeah, pretty much. So, I was studying sociology at the American University and minoring in English, which was basically acting and directing, theater-based English.
So I'm curious, what made you want to get into sociology? I mean, obviously you went into theater and film later. But what was it that made you want to get into sociology? And the second part of that question is, I assume, based on what I've seen and heard, that society in Egypt, like many places in the world, consists of a lot of poverty. There's a lot of there are social issues that, and especially after Nasser, we were talking about Nasser, the idea that life was difficult.
Yeah.
What was it about your life as a growing up and an adult in Egypt that led you into sociology?
Well, it's a very interesting story because I was studying medicine at first. And why was I studying medicine? Because the Egyptian education system is such that depending on the grades you get at your baccalaureate or secondary school certificate examination, the total assigns you to the university. That's how it goes. And because I had attained a 92.5% in my grades, automatically that's the grade that gets you into medical school. And I'm like, I don't want to go to medical school. No, you have to go to medical school. And then at 17, you're a little kind of naive, and everybody around you, the grown-ups, are telling you, but people who haven't gotten the necessary percentage, they are jumping off of Cairo Tower, they're committing suicide because they didn't, and you have the grade and you're wasting it. And you go, okay, maybe everybody knows better than I do. And then you go to college and go to medicine. And after a while, you realize, no, this is not what I want to do. So you transfer to the American University in Cairo, where there was a theater productions, but there wasn't a theater department. Later on, they established one, but at that point, it was English. So I minored in English and majored in sociology. And that came because of a charismatic sociology professor we had. And I wanted initially to do what was called back then mass communications, which is basically what I do now with my life. And then he said, no, with a mass communications degree, you're going to be right there because just at mass communications. But if you do sociology, you can always work in mass communications, and it gives you opportunity to continue to do PhD, masters, or whatever else you want. So again, the little girl who doesn't know very much listened, and I ended up in sociology.
Wow.
Show an ambassador, these words from the prophet. Check. I'm gonna show an ambassador, these words from. I'm gonna show an ambassador, these words from the prophet. Check. I'm gonna show an ambassador, these words from the prophet. Check.
My name is Haley Callahan. I'm an artist.
My name is Curtis Bates. Right now, pursuing a musical career.
You can write a book about my life, put some paint on every page. I'm gonna hustle to the grave.
In this film, I'm going to be an ambassador to tell the story of Holocaust survivors.
It's my responsibility to bring that to the light, what actually occurred during the Holocaust and why it should never be forgotten.
We had a chance to meet with 5 Holocaust survivors.
Part of my daily life through all the years of the Holocaust was hunger to the point of almost starvation.
And the slogan "Never Again" applies to never again for anybody, not just the Jewish community.
I was tattooed when we arrived in Auschwitz. We were all tattooed.
She said, "You are Jewish boys, but if anybody finds out, they will kill you."
And I believed my mother. I didn't know our goodbye was the last one.
Through the song that I'm going to create to detail the events of the Holocaust, I can give the younger generation something that's going to make it easier for them to understand what actually happened during the Holocaust in a way that is going to be absorbed.
As an ambassador, I'm going to use my art to tell a story for the younger generation so they can understand the significance of what happened during World War II and the Holocaust.
But on the way out, I took my teddy bear with me, because he was always with me, and I took him along. So he became my only possession, other than the clothes I was wearing. He was all.
These kids in the parade waving the Nazi flag had no idea that they were just pawns in Hitler's propaganda machine.
One of the things they say about hidden children is, yeah, you survived, but you didn't have a childhood. So what does it mean when you say this kid didn't have a childhood?
90% of Jewish children were killed during the Holocaust. And we will be gone there soon. Only will you young people be able to prevent such horrors like Holocaust from happening any place if you know what had happened and you learn how those things come about.
Before something like that happen again, we can stop it. I'm a show ambassador. These words from a prophet. Check.
So now you've got a sociology degree and you're living in London, you're living in Paris. And how did you go from sociology into theater and film? And tell us a little bit more about that transition.
Yeah, well, sociology was my education and training, but theater was with me since I was 15. So I must say that I started acting way back when at the Egyptian, in Cairo, at the Armenian Arts Club, that there was an Armenian artistic club. And my ex-husband, Gerald Papazian, who's a little older than me, was already like a young, talented director. And he I was introduced to him and he said, oh, he gave me a part. And initially I started taking my first steps on the stage in Cairo at the Armenian Cultural Club. And that already opened that world for me. But it wasn't kind of an option because my parents were like, oh, no, don't become an actress. So it was like not one of the desirable professions on the Armenian roster, let's say. So they kind of pushed me to go get your degree, do something, and then afterwards you'll decide. But then I now know that in this profession, especially as an actor, you need an early start. If you're 15 years old and you're already talented as an actor and you're showing your capacities, you should just, if I had a child now who's 15 and he wants to go or she wants to go to pursue an acting career, I'm going to say, fine, if that's what you want to do, you've got my entire backing. But unfortunately, the older generation was not like that, and they wanted you to go and get a first university degree first, which is what I did, being the good girl who listened to her parents, and continued my acting on the side. That's why when I went to London, even when I was doing my master's degree at the London School of Economics, I was still acting. I did a couple of plays at the Young Vic Theatre and at Riverside Studios. And then when, with my ex-husband, we immigrated to America, that's when I felt, okay, this is great. Now I've got this master's degree in sociology. I can frame it and hang it somewhere, but I am pursuing my acting career. And that was the turning point.
Oh, wow. You know, before we get into your acting career and obviously everything that followed, I'm still fascinated. And again, because you and I apparently share this horrible distinction of being children of those who've survived genocide.
Yeah.
Tell us a little bit more about how being Armenian in Egypt helped to mold you. You know, was there survivor guilt? I mean, I dealt with it all my life. This idea that my father felt that why did he survive and everybody else in his family didn't? And he felt guilty all his life. And although, you know, he smoked 3 packs a day, you know, that was his way of making amends. How did being Armenian in Egypt mold you and shape what you ended up doing later in life?
Well, the Armenian community in Egypt was very much tightly knit. They were all keeping together. Basically, always later on when we analyze this in the Armenian discussions or at home or everywhere else, is because the difference between the cultural difference between the Armenians and the local main population, the Islamic Egyptian culture. So kind of everybody wanted to keep to themselves to preserve the culture. That was the main preoccupation. And as such, we had the Armenian schools. I've had an Armenian schooling until primary. So naturally, in the school, you're hearing all these stories and so on. But in my case, it was more of a first-hand thing because my maternal grandmother was a survivor. My maternal grandmother was an educated woman, and she was 25 years old in 1915 when the Armenian genocide started and they had to leave. And she was in Kayseri, in Caesarea, in Turkey, which is kind of like central at the time. And her father was a priest. My great-grandfather was a priest who was hanged in 1915 at the beginning of all these massacres and genocide and all that. And my grandmother was the eldest daughter. So her mother, the priest's wife, herself, and her three other sisters had to leave. They had no choice. They were being deported, basically. And she had her newborn baby because she was a newlywed. And her husband had been taken away with all the other men in the village to dig trenches for the Turkish troops, which later became their own mass graves. And they went on these marches. So the baby didn't survive, and the grandmother didn't survive. So my grandmother and her three sisters arrived in Aleppo, Syria, after all the journey through the desert of the Syrian desert, passing through Deir Zor and arriving to Aleppo. And in Aleppo, some funny miracle happened, strange miracle. It was at the train station, and all these trains were being brought in with Armenians that were collected from all over the way, all over the rail tracks, from the different villages and towns and all that. And suddenly, and people were screaming out, yelling out family names in search of their surviving relatives. And my grandmother hears her name. So she looks up and it's her husband.
Oh my goodness.
After 3 years of being separated from each other, when each one thought the other must be dead, they find each other at Aleppo train station. And of course, it's a big moment. And she's telling him about the baby that was dead on the way that didn't survive. So the husband my grandfather tells her not to worry. Now that fate has reunited us, we are going to make new babies. And then they get to work right away. And they have my uncle, who unfortunately died quite young, and then my mother, and then they travel to Egypt, first to Alexandria, where my aunt is born, and then from Alexandria they moved to Cairo. So this is my first-hand knowledge of what happened. And my grandmother used to tell me these stories. I was very little at the time, and she used to tell me, write these down because one day you're going to need these stories. And of course, as a kid, what do you know? You know, you want to go to school, you want to play with your friends, you don't want to listen to these horrors. But now they come to me. Once in a while, I remember something she has told me. And this story that I just told is in my one-woman piece, which I recently did on Theatre Row in November. It's called Back on the Couch with Nora Armani. And so I do tell this story. And invariably, of course, every time I get tears in my eyes, because it also is, in a way, why I am here. Because if they hadn't found each other, you know.
And that's why I'm here, and that's why our organization is called Why I Love Jewish. You know, it's fascinating because refugees are refugees. Genocide is genocide.
Yeah.
Your experiences and your family's experiences are almost a mirror to my family's experiences. They found each other after the war. People shouting out names. How did you find people? DP camps. And I hate to say it, but, you know, the Armenian genocide was the first time the term genocide was ever used.
Yeah.
And the Holocaust, of course, was a genocide. But here we are today talk about social relevance, Russia has just invaded the Ukraine, and there are 100,000 refugees already on the road, and dead and murdered and bombs and children and walking across borders and being in refugee camps. So unfortunately, we never really learn. And somehow we seem to always repeat the same mistakes.
Totally. It's very, very sad. I was looking at these pictures and it was like as though it's like a playback. It's like a rewind and plays the same tape again, because 2 years ago when the Artsakh war happened and Azerbaijan attacked the Nagorno-Karabakh, who has been wanting to be independent since the independence of the Soviet Union, the same pictures of these people piling up their only belongings on a donkey cart, because these were like villages. In the Ukraine, it's more cars. But it's the same picture of all these people, of the roads being completely blocked, of people wanting to leave one way or another. And I'm like, did this have to happen? Can't people talk and reason with each other? Why do you have to attack? Why this misery?
And it's always the children who end up suffering the most. My mother was 9 years old and she walked from Poland all the way to Germany to be in a refugee camp. But that brings us to you now are in America. So, you have arrived, you're pursuing theater, you want to be an actress. My understanding now is now you've decided you're a sociologist, but you want to be an actress.
Yeah. Well, I didn't come to America first. I went to England, and then after a while we lived there. I did my master's degree, during which time I was still acting. So at that point, the acting always went from that point on, even though I was studying for my master's in London. In parallel, I was acting. So when we came,
and you lived in Paris?
Yes, the Paris came later.
I see.
Yeah. So from London, we migrated to America with my ex-husband, and his family were established in Detroit, in Michigan, and we started there. And from there, we went to Los Angeles, and we lived about 10 years in Los Angeles, which is where I did a bunch of television shows and a lot of theater, and that's where my acting career kind of took on. And a show that we got many, many awards for, called Sojourn at Ararat, which told the Armenian experience through poetry, that has been winning a lot of awards, and it started at the Edinburgh Festival. But then from Los Angeles, we went back towards Europe and established ourselves in Paris, where we lived another 10 years. It's like 10 year. It's like 10-year sentences each time. And then after Paris, my own personal life, after separating from my husband, changed. And I came to live in New York, and now I am remarried. And the reason why I came to New York was my current husband, present, my one and only.
Jag vet att du undrar varför jag har kommit hit.
Et sä tiedä, mitä mä ihmettelen ja mitä en?
Jag skulle nog undra om jag var du.
Mä oon psykiatri. En mä ihmettele ihmisten käyttäytymistä. Ihminen tekee elämällään mitä haluaa.
Har du barn?
Mun lapset ei kuulu vieraille. Onko sinulla lapsia? Janette Aspe. Minkä takia sä tulit tänne? Mikset vuosia sitten?
För att jag ville ge dig en gåva. Samtidigt se ett spår.
Jäljen.
Ett spår som jag lämnade efter mig för många år sedan.
Mikä jälki?
Dig, Karin.
Ollakseni aivan rehellinen, en ole koskaan ajatellut sinua äitinä.
Kära Karin, det har förflutit 32 år sedan jag såg dig senast. Tomheten tog vid då Ander dog, som straff för att jag lämnat dig, mitt enda barn.
When did you start getting involved in film? And how did you start, I guess, I assume, but correct me if I'm wrong, once again, that Armenian genetic story, the idea that you came from these roots, got you involved in presenting Armenian work, in getting involved in Armenian film. Can you tell us about working for the Ministry of Culture of Armenia? I mean, that to me is amazing.
Yeah, that was funny because in 1991, when the Soviet Union broke down, up until that point, all the film production, as you know, in the Soviet Union was funded through Moscow, and it was the Soviet production, basically, even though each country had its own film production and film studios. Then in 1991, when the Soviet Union broke down, all of these studios reclaimed their own independence as well. The rights to the films that they had produced under the Soviet thing reverted to their own studios, and Armenia started producing its own independent films. And suddenly I was cast as a Hollywood actress, because I was living in Los Angeles at the time, in the first independent feature film that was being produced in Armenia outside of the state-run and owned Soviet studios. And that film was called Deadline in 7 Days. And I played the lead role in it. And it was really interesting for me because I had to fly from Los Angeles to Armenia. It was the first time I was flying straight. And Armenia, Yerevan, the capital, is 800 meters at 800 meters elevation. And Los Angeles, of course, is at sea level. So I was like, I made a connection and I flew straight without any stopover on the way. I arrive in Yerevan. My heart is thumping like crazy. It's like I haven't adjusted with the elevation and the pressure and the atmospheric, and I'm going, what is happening? I'm going to die. And then the next morning, it's the first day of the shoot. They put me in a car and we keep driving up a mountain, and the more we go, I'm feeling faint. And then the driver noticed. He looked in the mirror and he goes, this girl is going to faint. So they stopped the car and they put me behind the exhaust to breathe a little bit of the exhaust because the oxygen was becoming too thin for me. And I was white as a sheet. So they call the doctor. The doctor comes, my blood pressure is way down, and they start feeding me coffee tea to get it up. So that was my first experience. And it was a period where there was a curfew because the Karabakh movement had started, the war had started, and there was a curfew. So when we first arrived, they couldn't drive me to the hotel. So that night I went and spent the rest of whatever remained of the evening or the night on the couch at the director's home. And the next morning, where daylight broke, was the time where they took me to the hotel. It was an amazing experience at an amazing period of time. And that was the first film. I had done a couple of Hollywood things like television, Saint Elsewhere and other stuff. but that was the first feature film that I was doing in a starring role.
So what made you start doing festivals? And how did you come to decide on socially relevant films as opposed to socially irrelevant films?
Actually, that's funny. I'll tell you a story about that too. When I was in Armenia, doing that film, that's when I actually discovered the Armenian film industry. It must be ignorant on my side, or it wasn't on my radar or something. I went to the studios. I wanted to find out what films they were doing and so on. And I was fascinated to see that there were really amazing things. Of course, everybody knows Parajanov and Peleshian and all these incredible names that have made waves in the international film circuit. And I was discovering the newer talents, the younger generation, the newer talents. So when I expressed my feelings about, wow, this is fascinating cinema, the Deputy Minister of Culture, who I had gotten to know socially, and who was in charge of the cinema division, he said, okay, then you will be our representative. And I said, well, what does that mean? What do I have to do? He goes, you'll go and then you'll find out. And I'm like, oh my God, I'm being given a mission here and I have no idea what I should do. So I went back to Los Angeles and went to the AFI, American Film Institute. And Ken Vlashin, bless his soul, was the director at the time of that program. And of course, he knew all about Armenian films, or about Parajanov and Peleshian and all these names. And he immediately said, okay, let's do a tribute to Armenian cinema. But at the time, it's not like today. Today, you have films that can be sent to you via internet. You have DCPs that are about this big. At the time, it was 35 millimeter heavy reels that you had to somehow transport all the way from Armenia to Los Angeles. And there was no budget for it. Who's going to fund a newly independent republic that doesn't have any money for the Ministry of Culture to pay for these things? So I had to put together a nonprofit group of friends of Armenian cinema, become creative. There was a charter airline. We brought them in as a partner. They flew people, they flew the films, etc., etc. So yeah, that's how it all started. But it was such an experience that I had sworn to myself never to organize a film festival myself. Maybe be a guest curator here and there, but never do the whole thing. And suddenly, look at me.
I was going to say, if I had a nickel for every time I said I wasn't going to do another festival, I'd probably have enough money to do a festival.
Qu'est-ce que tu prévoyais faire dans ton plan de sortie?
Faire mon temps, finir mon mandat.
On va réaliser l'insertion sociale et professionnelle des personnes sans emploi éloignées du marché du travail. L'entreprise est une passerelle vers l'emploi, parce qu'ici, c'est un début, hein? C'est pas une fin en soi.
C'était la première fois que tu étais là-dedans? Non, c'était la 5e fois. J'ai fait 4 mois, 19 mois, puis 6 mois, puis là, je viens de pogner 36 mois.
Et la prochaine fois, tu t'en vas à la grande école, tu le sais.
Ça.
Hein?
I'm so fascinated by the idea of socially relevant film. And so if you don't mind telling us more about where do you find your films? How do you define what is socially relevant from what is almost socially relevant?
Well, one day I was in Los Angeles at a film screening, and I was sitting next to this guy who introduced himself as a producer in Los Angeles. And I said, oh yeah, I'm doing a festival on socially relevant films. And I said, it would be wonderful to talk to each other as a producer. You might want to come in on board and so on. He goes, no, 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 no. I only do socially irrelevant films. I said,
right.
okay.
It make money. You know, only films that actually make money.
Exactly. That's basically what he meant. Well, socially relevant came about because of my, I was sick and tired of seeing all this violence, as I was saying, on screen and off screen. And initially, I wanted to do the non-violent. Actually, there is a festival now which is called the Non-Violent Film Festival. And I'm like, okay, that was our initial idea. But then we expanded it to include not only films that don't deal with violence, but also films that cover all sorts of social issues. So social issues, it could be environment, it could be violence against women, domestic violence, it could be sex trafficking, human trafficking, it could be race, prejudice, genocide and Holocaust. It could be, I mean, we have a ton of different themes this year, which some of them are the ones that I mentioned. We've also had age-related issues in the past. We've had children and youth-related issues. We do have children and youth section this year. And
do you have different categories? So there's fiction, there's nonfiction, documentary.
Yes, we do have that. When people are submitting their films, they don't submit to the theme, because we do not choose the themes ahead of time. We don't say, okay, let's make this year's festival on Holocaust, or let's make it on domestic violence or human trafficking. No, we make it documentary shorts, narrative shorts, documentary features, narrative features, and we have a script writing competition. We also had 2 new sections that were added this year, actually 3. One of them was web series, because there is so much web stuff going on right now, or series stuff going on. The other is animation. And the third one is children, either films made by children or films made for children.
Wow,
Could also be
that's
made
wonderful.
by children, yeah.
What a
So
great-
these are the categories where people are submitting their films into. Later on, how the themes come about is once we start looking at the films for the purpose of selection, we realize that, first of all, we have to look for social issues. Is the film talking about a certain social problematic? Second, is it good? Is it well made? Do the production values hold? We don't want to show amateurish stuff, you know. Handheld is okay, iPhone is okay, but it has to be, you know, a little bit more artistically valid. Then after the 2, we also look at who is the audience for this. But that's like more of a development issue. The first 2 determine basically. And once we select the best films, we let the filmmakers tell us their story. And out of those stories emerge the themes that will be that year's themes.
Wow. How many films do you generally get submitted?
Well, it depends. On the COVID years, it went down, so we only had like 350, but basically it's anywhere from 400 to 500 films.
Amazing.
Yeah, and we need to sit down and sort through them. Of course, I don't watch all 500 films. I would be dead by now.
Right.
But we have a group, a selection group, whose initial task is to say if the film is a yes and a no or a maybe. And then the no's, of course, it could be a no because they didn't read the guidelines, it's not at all socially relevant, or it's full of explosions or gun violence or killing or whatever, so it's not going to work for us. So that already goes out. The maybes, we hold them separate to see if there is a hole in the program that we need to fill. And then we focus on the yeses. And then the yeses tell us their story.
And you've been doing this almost 10 years.
Yes.
So can you tell us a little bit about the first decade of the Socially Relevant Film Festival and the kinds of films that you are now involved in, not only this year, but also what do you have coming up in the future?
Yes, the first 10 years pretty much are the same. But the first year was terribly difficult, I must say. So what happens is that the first year, people love your idea and they go, wow, this is really cool. You're doing a festival on social issues. I love the idea behind it, and so on and so forth. And then, but nobody is ready to put their money where their mouth is, because how do they know you can deliver, you know? So that's not basically what they want to back. And then the second year, things started to move a little bit more easily because people had seen what we had been able to deliver. And I must say, there are people in your life where the meeting with this person can have a decisive effect. And I cannot deny that, because when I first had this idea, I wanted to see, okay, where are we going to do this festival? So what were the options? We had to do it in an art house cinema. So what were the art house cinemas at the time? I went to the Quad Cinema, and I went to a bunch of other cinemas. And Elliot Kanbar, the owner of Quad Cinema, was amazing. He was such a mentor in reality. He welcomed us, he talked to us, he even took us to lunch. He said, okay, he said, I'll give you my cinema. Of course, I mean, we were paying for it, but of course the attitude, the welcome, the not being negative about it. Why do you need another film festival? What is this one about? And so on. Plus, he gave us a fantastic beginning award. What was it? The winning film, the winning main feature, was going to have a 1 week free at the cinema, and they get to keep the box office.
Wow.
And I thought, this is incredible. And of course, that was an amazing first prize, the grand prize that we could give. The second year, I kept wanting from him to give me the dates for my second year. What are the dates? And he was, yeah, I'll get back to you. And I'm like, can't he just look at the calendar and tell me? Why is he getting back? As it turns, he was in the middle of a transfer sale deal with Cohen Media, which is the person who bought the cinema now, as you know. So that's it. So the second year we could not go back there because it was not possible anymore. And they said the Quad people, the Cohen Media people, were very nice as well. But they said, we cannot guarantee your dates because we are going to completely remodel the cinema. But they honored the 1 week free screening for the winning film.
Wow.
So we were able to do that as well the second year. So we went to Cinema Village, and since then we're stuck with Cinema Village. So yeah,
it could be worse. Cinema Village is okay.
No, Cinema Village is nice. It's good. Yeah, it's changed a lot. But in between, we went to Tribeca cinemas. They closed. Everywhere we would go, have the film festival for one time, they would close for whatever. The building got sold. They decided they don't want the cinema there, so they couldn't do it anymore. Then we went to the Bowtie Cinema, which became the Cinepolis, but So we did the little tour.
I remember always loving the Quad. The first movie that I ever made was at the Quad. I remember it when it premiered there, and it was so exciting.
Yeah.
And so I think, you are living in a very exciting and important world, because not only are you in the excitement of film, which is always exciting, but also the whole concept of socially relevant, and especially nowadays. And again, I think more and more, we are finding how we are missing the relevance of social issues in our lives. And as I said earlier, here we are looking at a new, invasion of Ukraine, except all these things are always happening.
Yes.
Never again is always now.
Absolutely.
And that's part of the work that we're trying to do with our organization, is bring forward the idea that, we say never again, we use it so, easily, and yet never again is always now.
Is always happening again.
It's always happening again. There's a very important woman who works at the United Nations refugee organizations, and she said, don't say never again, say ever again, because it's always and ever and forever. So tell us about what you're doing now and what you see for the future of the Socially Relevant Film Festival.
Well, what we are doing now is like in a little over 2 weeks, we have our opening at the Lincoln Center, and we have decided today to make it free for students. Free, FREE.
Yes.
But they have to show that they are a student, everybody can come and say, I'm a student of life. Yeah, I'm a student of life too, but, and we have a $7 early bird ticket for people who are not students. So people cannot have an excuse. It's not expensive. The regular price is $15 for the in-person tickets, and online it's $7, but we also have a $50 ticket online that can allow you to see all the films an unlimited number of times, and a $75 all-access ticket, which allows you to see all the films in person and all the films online, and be present at all the in-person events and parties. So it's a deal. It's the deal of the town.
Very reasonable. Very reasonable.
And we thought, why are we doing all this? We are doing all this to establish a legacy, to teach younger generations about people who came before them and who are contemporaries, whose lives matter, whose lives they should listen to, instead of only being fascinated by 1 minute TikTok things in which somebody is doing a funny dance, or a cat or a dog are doing some funny movements or whatever, which is okay for distraction every now and then.
I hope you're not implying that cat videos are not socially relevant. Because I know people who would be very upset by that.
They are very socially relevant. In fact, when your eyes are popping out after programming 64 films in the socially relevant film festivals, you want to watch cat and dog films on TikTok because it's a distraction. But what I'm saying is we're thinking of developing of that. First of all, to do a big 10th anniversary where everybody who has been with us until now, whether it's filmmakers or important personalities or VIP that we've had the honor and the luck to have with us, like Amy Goodman was one of our keynote speaker our first year. We have had Pulitzer and Emmy winning Robert Schenken, playwright and script writer, who has been a supporter and on script writing jury, Gretchen Carlson, and Guy Davidi from Israel. He came all the way to present at our festival, and a lot of other people. I mean, wonderful, wonderful people. So important for us to be able to bring back these people and do a big 10th anniversary, but also to present the educational films, the films that have a specific educational value, to do like a channel where educators, universities, colleges, and schools can go to and pick the theme of their choice. And I have some of the themes here, like climate change, sustainability. We have one about dance culture and music. Disability is another one. Family matters, genocide, Holocaust and memory, gun violence and endangered species, health matters, indigenous people and their rights, LGBTQ stories, the lockdown, immigration and migration, race, prejudice and discrimination, sex violence and trafficking, youth and social change, urbanization, social change. Then we have women, whether it's from a point of view of violence or sex and reproduction or mother-daughter relations. So these are the themes that an educator might need to go to some kind of library that has something that would be an educational tool. Right. So we want to start producing those.
So before we bring this to a close, because we're already almost an hour.
Oh my God.
Yeah, it's amazing how fast the time goes when you're having a socially relevant time. Do you have a separate theme for each festival? That's question number one. And question number two, have you ever considered doing the socially relevant festival and exporting it to other cities and other areas and other places, so it becomes not only a New York Film Festival, but something that you can see all over the world, because it's so important?
Yeah, well, as I was saying earlier, we don't decide the themes beforehand. We choose the best films in each selection, like these themes that I read to you are the themes from this year.
I see. Wow, that's a lot of themes.
Yeah, some of them have an overlap from previous years. Like, for example, in other years, we have had deforestation. We have had old age matters.
You might have one or two films in any given theme.
Exactly.
But you have many, many themes, which is great.
Exactly.
Oh, I think that's brilliant.
So we don't decide the themes beforehand. We pick the films first and then build around the program around that, and then put the film category, the theme category, so that people can navigate easier amongst them. And in terms of why don't we do it in other cities, I would love to do that. There was at some point a possibility of bringing it to a cinema in Washington, D.C., but then it didn't materialize because we were not as organized at the time, and it would have been too much logistics, and the person over there could not handle it on their own. But if there are takers out there who want us to bring them a mini socially relevant film festival or do a franchise, I'm more than happy to collaborate with them. We already have an offer to do something in Armenia, and that's going to be later in the year in a second city of Armenia, not in Yerevan. So we'll be developing that, and you'll hear more about it as it gets closer. And one other one I want to launch is we got an incredible number of solo films. People who made a film by themselves during lockdown, you know, so we want to expand that lockdown idea, because for some people it was terrible, they couldn't do anything, but for others it was an opportunity to focus on one thing and produce something out of that. So that deserves a little bit more attention.
Nora, I am so impressed with everything you do. Can you tell everybody where they can find you, how they can help support what you're doing, and you know, and how you can keep on doing what you're doing?
Well, the best support would be coming to the cinema and going online and watching the movies. Of course, I could say, oh, give us a big grant, but the grant is not useful. What would I do with the grant? I mean, yeah, I can pay the people who are volunteers now. Maybe that would be much better. Incidentally, we are all volunteers, including myself. But we could be all paid and everything. It could be nicer. But if people still don't come, then who are we doing this for? So the best support is to show up, to come to the cinema, mingle with the filmmakers. We have a lot of filmmakers coming from Canada. This year we have a Voices of Canada section, which is supported by the Canadian Consulate General in New York. And the 3 Canadian filmmakers are flying in at the expense of the Telefilm Canada and Consulate. And we also have the director of their Algeria, the opening night film, flying in, the German director, the Finnish director. There's going to be a whole lot of European and local directors mingling with each other, and hopefully with the audience as they are there, with Q&As after every film. So for me, the best support is to attend the festival.
What is your website? Tell everybody your website.
Yes, www.ratedsrfilms.org.
ratedsrfilms.org. We will certainly let everybody know that they should go and see the movies. And, you know, I hope that someday we will be able to possibly be able to bring a mini socially relevant film festival to our people.
That would be great.
Yeah, we're based in Florida, but you know, we need it here more than anywhere right now, because there are lots of things in Florida that could use a little social relevance. Ladies and gentlemen, I couldn't be happier to have had Nora Armani from the Socially Relevant Film Festival as my guest today. Please go and check it out, see what they're doing, support their work, and we will see you the next time on Shmoozing with Avi. Is there anything else you'd like to share?
I want to share something. We didn't go into the individual films because we focused so much on my personal story. But I must say that one of the films might be very pertinent for the listeners. It's the Shoah Ambassadors, and I need to single that out specifically. It's called Shoah Ambassadors, and it's survivors who are combining with rap singers, and together they are bringing the memory alive. It's a great, great movie. So please check that out, if nothing else, but do check all the films.
Good. Yes, obviously we do a lot of work related to the Shoah and genocide. As a matter of fact, there are 2 films I've done over the years that have been at many festivals, not at the Socially Relevant Festival yet. Do you do short films? I'm just curious.
Yes.
Oh, well, then I will have the filmmakers submit the films that I've been involved in to you. Yeah, thank you. Thank you. Thank you once again, ladies and gentlemen. Nora Armani, the Socially Relevant Film Festival. Stay tuned. Visit us at whyilovejewish.org to find out more and see all the wonderful programs that we bring you all the time.
Thank you so much for hosting me. Thank you.
Of course. Thank you.